beautiful classical music session with Fran Walton and her friend Dr. Kathy Zubal. But yesterday morning, Fran had a heart defibrillation of some kind and is in the hospital. But she's perfectly all right now and wants to get out of bed and come here, but they won't let her. The Waltons, by the way, Fran and her husband Roger, as far as we know, unless somebody comes out that we don't know about, are the longest time residents of Mirrormont.
How long?
They moved in August 1964.
48 years, that's my anniversary.
49 years,
49?
about, right? Yeah, 49. And well, other than that, they would be here because they know a lot about Mirrormont. And I think I'm the second longest resident, but somebody can just prove that. January 1965. Well, if Dave Johnson shows up, he was going to talk about John Temkov. And if you guys haven't been here that long, Temkov was a real estate agent of Seaboard Realty who actually sold all the lot, or most of the lots to Mirrormont in those days for Rod Loveless and Glenn Norbley. And by the way, Glenn Norbley's son in the audience, he was going to come today. Well, he was here. Rod Loveless and Glenn Norley started Mirrormont, as you probably know, Woodland Properties, and Norley ran the water and oil systems here at that time because they were called pipeline systems and were local. And you may have seen the information over there about the underground oil system that Mirrormont had, and I had thought it was the only one in the country, but I was proved wrong. There were a couple on the East Coast where the oil was actually piped directly into your house, just like your water system, through meters. But after about 10 years or so, the lines deteriorated, and the county wouldn't let them repair them, and number one, and number two, it was too expensive. So everybody had to get out on their own, and the rich kids, as I call them, all got heat pumps. But poor guys, we just bought oil tanks and fixed up our furnaces to the lines. Matter of fact, I just converted from oil last year to gas, finally. We didn't have natural gas here until, I think, late in the 90s sometime or other, you know.
I'm just going to add, Corey didn't put in a fire burning.
See?
Corey Green did the fire. She put in a fireplace in the garage to stoke each morning to warm her house. Oh. So some did oil, some did electricity.
Joyce, you're supposed to come up here too and tell your story. And since Dave Johnson isn't here, you come right now and talk about the people who owned your house in the first place and built the stable. Joyce lives in one of the first houses in Mirrormont. Come talk about that because I don't know those people's names or anything.
Well, actually, I think it's school teachers.
Yes.
But I'm not used to talking about it. No, I live in the old Smith house that was built in 63, 64. And they landscaped it back then, and I'm not sure. They can't hear. Oh, there we go. I have to talk like this. The house was built in about 64, and I noticed from the pictures that the Smiths sent about the house, it was landscaped in the front, and I've had to keep that thing up for 35 years. So it's still landscaped, and it's probably one of the only ones you can see from the street that is landscaped as you're driving around or walking around. Yeah, I have to pick weeds. You wouldn't know I lived in Mirrormont. I should have let them go. But it's been a really fun time living here, having the family grow up here. I moved up from San Francisco, and I thought this would be a good place for my kids to hunt lions and tigers, and, you know, in the woods, and that's the way it works. But I would have pretty well shriveled up and died had I not been a member of the Mirrormont Club, which was to be an all-community undertaking. But the community built faster than the piece of property where the swimming pool and the tennis courts, which came in a little later, happened to be. So, but this is where you met your friends, and this is where you socialized, because we had nothing in Issaquah, you amused your family by going to the grocery store. That was it. And so we had pretty much, other people can speak to this because they did it more, but they speak to the parties we used to have here, pretty much monthly. This was the other thing.
I didn't mean to shut you off, but you don't want to hear about some of those parties. We were all young. And different. But she talked about, I was going to say something, about the early days of Issaquah, which I can't remember now, but to move on here, we also have with us a gentleman named Gary Young and Helen Young, who lived here for years and moved away. But Gary worked in the real estate business with John Timkoff, who I mentioned earlier, who was the guy who, and I said Dave Johnson had it wrong, Gary's the guy that worked with him. And I'd like you to come up and talk about John, if you will, just a little bit. John was quite a guy. He was very affable, and while he's come up in those days, for instance, myself moved up here with no money, and I was able to move in without any down payment at all, and just start paying monthly payments. And I know other people have asked me, so I'll tell you. My house and acre cost me $29,500.
Well, my wife and I moved here in Mirrormont in 1968. And my first home was right up the street here, and it was about 5 blocks from here. And we were the first house on the main road in. That's what it was in 1968, but probably less than 20 homes here. And speaking of John Timkoff, we came out here on...
End of it in your mouth. There you go.
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. My wife and I came out here in 1968 on a promotion on the Channel 7 house, the big chalet. You see the photos right here. And we came out to see that, and we were impressed with the lifestyle here in this community, kind of buried in the woods. And so we met John Timkoff out here, visiting the Channel 7 house, and he showed us a few homes that were built mostly by Rod Lovelace. What I remember most about John is he's a very well-educated person, and could speak on just about any subject, very knowledgeable. But the most laid-back real estate agent you ever saw. And we had to ask him if we could buy the house. You know, that's the way it was. That's the way John was. And we bought a speculation house up the street here, when John showed us the house, and we were just loved it. You know, buried in the woods is just what we were looking for. And John never said anything about buying it. He just said, well, "Why don't you come out and you can just stay in the house for a few hours. I'll just unlock it and you can sit in the house and look around." And we did. We came out and just talked to each other, you know, no salesman. And John came back eventually, and we left, and he never suggested that we buy the house. And so we had to pursue him. And but he was a wonderful person. He was the person that sold the original property here of 660 acres to Woodland Property, Rod Lovelace and Ed Nordley. And he had sold the property to them, and then was the primary realtor after they started developing it. And I haven't seen Rod Lovelace here today. We had talked to him, thought he might come by, but it was one of the most interesting projects. You know, back in those days, you could develop a project with little money. And if Rod were here, he'd probably tell you how little. I'm not going to say. But Rod was one of these people that could not only wheel and deal and buying and selling, but he could actually get out there and excavate the roads and dig the ditches and all that. And he did that here. He would move a little road, excavate a road, maybe 500 or 600 feet of road, and then he would sell the lots and get enough money to push in another road. And that's the way Mirrormont materialized. But what else did you want to talk about, Tom?
Well, just about what happened to John.
Okay, John, yeah, he essentially lived here in a home that Woodland Properties built, and he kind of was like a man of the woods. He was quite an introvert for being involved in real estate, and I've always worked for Boeing all my life, but I had a sideline of dabbling in real estate. And so I worked with John Tinkoff here. We had little chalet sales offices throughout the area here. And we'd sit around with John and waiting for customers to come by. And I remember John once said, you know, I wonder what the person will look like that'll come by and buy a large number of lots. And, I thought a guy in three-piece suit. John said, no, he'll come in here in raggedy old clothes and be driving an Ash. And by golly, a party came in, looked just about like that, and bought 110 lots here. This whole section over here, a family by the name of Elwood, and not related to Shirley and Ted. and that was the biggest sale I'd ever seen. And so that was John.
I had the privilege of talking with Mark Nordley this afternoon, who was Glenn Nordley's son. He was one of the three, he was Rod Lovelace's partner in Woodland Properties. And he told me that the 600 acres of Mirrormont sold for $395,000. Yeah. And I also talked with Rod Lovelace at my house last Monday. He came down from where he's living. He has a condo in Kenmore, and he's on Decatur Island this weekend. He's 87, and he's bulldozing and backhoeing, putting in a golf course up in Decatur Island.
Doing it himself.
Himself, yeah.
Well, in case you don't know it, Linda Shepherd is the woman who did the research for all this. We found stuff that most of us forgot about or didn't know anything about. I was going to end up with John and saying that as he got older, things changed a little bit. He grew a great big long beard like Santa Claus. He lived over there in a house that was covered in woods and things, and was a very interesting character. Anyway, Dave Johnson, are you here now? Oh, here. See, Dave, he'll be here in a minute. And Dave and Sandy moved in 1966 down 260th and lived right across the street from Joe Sackman, the state policeman who was the first resident of Mirrormont. And so Dave knew him well and has an interesting story to tell about him and something that happens up here, which I won't go into. I gotta read my. Oh, I was going to say I don't know anybody here to talk about the country club necessarily, but it finally opened in 1969 with a pool in the clubhouse. The tennis courts weren't built until some years later. That was a ball field for our kids, and we had little league teams. And the grandstands were piled up logs, and the backstop was a big piece of wood. But it worked. And Mr. Elder, who he mentioned, was very beneficial to the community. He paid every year for a very substantial fireworks display. And I mean, it was really nice. And by buying those lots, he was able to provide Lovelace enough money to keep going, because one of the reasons you moved up here in those days was for the country club, which wasn't here, because he couldn't afford to build it. And so Sandy Johnson, I can tell you how that worked, but finally a committee of people up here got together and worked with Lovelace to build the club with some of his money and some other stuff. And our first fence around the swimming pool was cedar shakes, which you can still see part of over there before they put in the other wiring. So when the clubhouse opened, like I said, it became a social center even if you weren't members. So, and that's what I was going to say. People who moved up here in those days didn't want the country club. And the people who wanted the country club put flyers out in the mailboxes, and the others came and took them out because they moved up here to get away from it all. And the idea of country club, like sorority and fraternity, didn't register with them, you know, and they didn't like that. But we finally got it done.
What year was this built?
It opened in 1969. And a little story behind it that goes with that. I don't know how many of you remember the name Bert Ross. A fellow named Bert Ross and his wife, Moselle, lives down here. Now, Moselle's maiden name was Dayan, D-A-Y-A-N. Ring any bells? She was the niece of Moshe Dayan, who was the war minister for Israel. Well, back in the late 40s and 50s. Well, anyway, they were really nice people, and he was very glib, is that the word I want? He ran a street striping machine company, so he was instrumental in helping get organized to build the club. And so after it was built and the officers were elected, he became the first president. And it turned out that then he was using the club's, you know, this is no cell phone, the club's phone for his business. And it was costing us in those days because you paid, you know, for phones in long distance, like you don't now. So we found that out, and he had to stop being president. But about the same time, his wife, Moselle, who was a very interesting woman, and I can say this because they're not around, she was a little nutty. And she saw things like flying saucers off the deck of her house. And also, if somebody she didn't like and came around her house, she pulled a gun on them. But the flying saucer thing developed to where people came and got out on their decks on certain weekends. I've forgotten how or why, maybe Dorothy or Shirley remember, to watch for flying saucers. And I don't think they ever saw any, but they had the party. But people said they saw. People said they saw. That's probably right. Well, anyway, the story goes on that after all this, they left Mirrormont and went away somewhere, and I didn't know where, but a couple of years later, I ran into a guy selling carpets, and it was Bert Ross under a different name. So he was sort of a con man, but he was really interesting. And that's just one story here in Mirrormont. I wish I could read my writing. Dave Johnson, are you here yet?
Still out there, the wine?
Huh?
He's out there, the wine.
Oh, he is, okay.
He may never come in.
Oh, yeah. Let me put my glasses on. Oh, well, we mentioned the elders already, and his contributions were very many. But in the beginning, Glenn Nordley was the manager for the water system and the oil system, and the only water tank was on the hill going out the back entrance. The big wooden tank was still there, and it started leaking badly. And my son, when he was about 12 or 13, was taxed to read the meter and call it into Glenn every week. That's how they kept track of the thing. I never did know how many wells there were, but I think there was only one then, and we did run out of water. Not often, but sometimes, especially up here. The ones down lower didn't. And then Shirley talked about her house and her husband Phil, who unfortunately died some time ago, but they were the hosts for a long time to a weekly poker party for people around Mirrormont. So things like that happen. And you may have read or heard there were people who died here. A woman who died in unfortunate circumstances after a party one night. Another man who, unfortunately, at a country club party, I know you like these kind of stories, declared his love for another man's wife, and the next morning, or that evening or something, his wife beat him up with a baseball bat. And he was broken up at the next morning. So we had a lot of those things. What? I think she said she kicked him down the steps and he ended up in the hospital. Where Dorothy was working at the time. So, Shirley, you look like you want to say something.
Well, I wondered if people remember we had a security system here in the early 70s.
Okay, talk about it.
Why don't you go first?
Watch your glasses.
You can sit down. You can sit down.
Oh, good, I don't
Just
have
push the lever up.
a lever.
Hold it close to your mouth.
Hello? I can't remember now how many of us were involved, but we decided that we needed to see if there were robbers around or people that shouldn't be in Mirrormont. So a group of women, I did it every Tuesday morning. We would drive around all up and down the dirt roads and the hard roads looking for people that shouldn't be here. I don't know what would have happened if we ever saw somebody. But we did our job. I don't remember.
A couple years.
Okay, I can add to that. I was part of the ladies.
This is Louise Polly, by the way.
Yeah, I was part of the ladies patrol, doing my duty. Doing my duty.
Closer to your mouth.
And I saw a car that didn't have the proper M sticker on it. And so I followed him around and around and around all of his roads. Not at a very close distance, but obviously he recognized somebody was following. So he stopped, came back to my car, and he said, "Are you the ladies patrol?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, I'm looking for lots to build on. I'm just a builder."
Along that same line, Dave Johnson and I went night some people loitering around and were able to get rid of them. But in the beginning, in case you don't know, the actual front entrance to Mirrormont was the back entrance for a short time. But when the front entrance opened up, the road was paved coming up to the place where you make that sharp right. And from then on, it was all gravel and dirt. And the paved road only came up, as I recall, to the end where it dead ended, and then 263rd, when we moved in, was gravel. All the roads were gravel except that main road. But I understand Dave is around now.
It's right there.
There he is. So he is going to come and talk about Sackman briefly and that little story. Well, as I say, Dave and Sandy moved up here in 1966, lived here 37 years, I think it was, 37. Then they moved to Fort Ludlow because he's a boat freak.
Nothing wrong with boats. Well, anyway, Joe Saxman lived right across the street from us. And some people say that he was the first resident up here. I don't know for sure whether he was not, but he was the state highway patrolman. And Joe had a daughter that was the same age as our daughter, and they played together a lot, so we knew the Sackmans quite well. And Joe was a real down-to-earth guy. He was, had a certain percentage of Indian in him. Native American, I guess would be the proper term. Hard worker, nice guy. And one Saturday we were, summer was hot. And he was working his yard, I was doing something in our yard. And so he came across the street, we were sitting out on the deck and having a drink of Coke more likely or something. But anyway, we're sitting there. He had his Levi's on, or t-shirt. And all of a sudden this car comes by, just flying by, going down 260th, go around the bend down there. And then another car right behind it, just going like crazy. And then a third one, or a fourth one. And Joe jumps up, runs across the street, jumps in his police car, zips out and goes down the road, comes up right about where Tom lives over there, put his car right across the street. And so they come whipping around the corner down there and back up there, and they all come to a screeching halt. And it turned out to be some mowing car rally. And I mean, when they went by, they were probably doing 50 plus miles an hour going down the street, which I can't remember if we had got the speed limit reduced to 25 miles an hour by that time, if it was still 40. But between Sandy and Joe Sackman, we managed to get the speed limit up here reduced down to 25 miles an hour rather than the 45, which it originally was. But then Joe got transferred over to Lake Chelan, and so he was over there for quite a while. We used to go over and visit him. Then he got transferred over to Forks and go over there. It was great fishing, going over the fishing there. But another little story about Joe is when we were over in Forks, it was a Saturday night, or no, I think it was a Friday night. Kids were all out running around. And so he had patrol, so I went out and rode patrol with him. And so I came upon him in the car, had a whole bunch of kids in there that were drinking. And so he pulled them over, and he said, he sat in the car for a minute, he said, here's what I want you to do. I'm going to get out, and they're going to be looking at me, and as soon as I get out, you get out and go around the other side of the car and hold the door shut so they can't get it open. And so he's slowly walking up there, and I'm running along the ditch there, so I'm holding on the door. And then he gets there, opens it up, and of course the kids are trying to get out, and I'm holding the door shut. And so finally we haul him down to the local sheriff's station, and then he gives these kids a lecture. And I tell you, these kids were crying. And he was telling them about all the blood and guts of these accidents, you know, the stuff that he's seen. And he really went into details. Kids ripped apart and everything else, and these kids were just really upset. And so they said, now we're going to call all your mothers, come down and get you. If you're out of here, they're not going to do anything to you. And I thought I was really impressed with the lecture that he gave those kids. And I'd be willing to bet money today that none of those kids ever got in trouble. So, anyway, Joe was a great guy, and whether he was the first guy up there or not, I don't know. But it was nice to have a name. Always nice to have a police car sitting in front of your house. You know, worry about that. And back in the 60s, it was pretty remote up here, and crime was a problem. And you've probably seen cars at one time around here, I guess there's still some today, they have a little M in the back window. Because we used to have sort of a local patrol where the women would drive around the day and look at cars in people's driveways. If they didn't see that M in the window, you'd probably be suspected of being maybe a criminal or something. So they could call the sheriff, which wouldn't be able to get here anyway. Anyway, that's my little story. And between Tom and Sandy, they're probably the historians of this place. So, thank you.
Well, I don't remember stories about people very much, but speeding's another story. You remember the days on the Hobart Road you could run 60, 70 miles an hour with no problem? Another little speeding story, there was a family up here named the Langdons, John and Barbara Langdon. And John was one of these mechanical guys who can do anything. Give him a screwdriver and a wrench, he can build a building. Matter of fact, recently you read about the tunnel that they're building in Seattle to replace the viaduct with a great big boring machines that bore through the ground. Well, John was the chief mechanic on those machines, and he traveled all over the world installing and setting them up. But the speeding story I'm going to give you is two of them. He had a Volkswagen microbus, and he didn't think it went fast enough. So he got a Corvair engine. Now, a Corvair was an old Chevy that had a flat rollers 4 engine in the rear. It was determined to be unsafe at any speed by Ralph Nader. Anyway, he got one of those motor engines. The motor's electric and engine is gas, okay. He got one of those engines and put it in his microbus, and because it rotated in a different direction, he had to change the transmission. And he also decided to put on new wheels in the back and different brakes, so he had to do a lot of metal cutting and fixing, all in one weekend. And so the next day, or Monday, his wife Barbara got in it to go down the hill and managed to roll it over at the bottom of the hill. I don't know if he's going too fast. But he also built a race car in his garage down in the back here. You know, one of those kind with pipes sticking up and all that kind of stuff. And he got me to push him to get it started when he got it finished. And it started and it made noise. You could have heard all around Mirrormont. So he was an interesting guy, and they moved away. But now I'm back on noise, and how many of you people know about the Lion? 263rd dead ends in 152nd. At the end of that street is a house. If you go by there now, it's all metal. It's all metal. The guy that rebuilt it, the roof is metal. But before that, it was an A-frame, one of the original A-frames. And the people named Curran used to live there, and Anita Curran, I understand, is still alive, living up on 132nd here at the other side of the nudist colony. But this third family that moved in there, a guy, the second family built a big fence behind it, or kennel, I guess, because they raised German Shepherds, so they had high fences. The third person that moved in there, for a friend of his, decided to keep a full-grown male lion. And I'm telling you, in the summertime, when that lion would roar, you could hear it all over here. It was a real lion. Some of the neighbors, and I don't know who finally made him get rid of it. We were all kind of relieved about that. Oh gosh, what year? Oh, somebody help me, what year?
Early 70s.
Probably 70s, yeah. 75? Yeah, in that area.
The Seattle Times had a headline, lion on Tiger Mountain.
Oh, it did? Yeah. You missed it. Funny. All right, who else has any story? Who am I missing here? Or who else has any questions? Oh, good.
Jane, I was wondering if you could talk about the progressive dinners, or from Melinda?
Well, maybe you should talk about the progressive. Yeah. Joyce.
One of my interests is to have more community in Mirrormont, and this is one of the reasons that I got involved in this. And so early on in Mirrormont, there was a lot of community with poker games and progressive dinners, and so I thought it would be interesting to hear what that was like.
Well, I mean, I can hear you say a couple of things.
Well, my husband and I moved out here from Colorado in 1974, and we had 5 acres in Colorado, and so we were really looking for a neighborhood that had property, and so Bob was shown this area. I didn't come out at the time, but he was shown this area, and of course we ended up moving here in 1974. And we didn't know a soul, and because there were so few homes up here, we thought, how are we going to get to know people? So this little country club was here, and we're not club joiners per se, but we decided, well, let's go ahead and join this little club. And I have to tell you, the neighbors that were here at the time, I think everybody just depended on everybody, and you got to know everybody fairly quickly. And people were out and about, and this was a very, very active country club. And we had progressive dinners, we had theater nights, we had casino night, we had pig roasts, we had clam bakes, we had many, many children events, and what? Christmas parties, and Easter egg hunt, and as with any organization, there would be a certain group of people that would do the organizing of these events. And after a period of time, you would say, you know, we've been there, done that, and it's time to move on and let somebody else take over, and we've all been in those places. But during those years, this was a very, very active club. And we've noticed in recent years, of course we don't belong to the club anymore, but we don't know some of our neighbors. And we've been up here since 1974, and we seemed to know everybody back then, and people were just more to themselves. And so those were happy times. So I'm so glad Linda's willing to work on getting that kind of relational thing going again.
Well, I didn't talk about that. I generalized.
By the way, that's Jane Ulrich and Bob Ulrich, her husband, and their daughter Kyra is now the president of the country club.
Oh,
I don't know where she is.
she's probably out for the beer gardener.
But one thing she hinted at but didn't really point out was what we had was really nice swimming meets. So we had lane markers in the pool, we had diving board where we had divers and judges, and all I can tell you was really great. And of course, the casino nights were a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah. Fred put
So, where were we?
Well, progressive dinner, I never.
Oh, progressive dinner.
Rest-
Who's going to talk about, you or Melinda?
Linda, why did you bust this? I was just up there. We needed a.
I can bring you the mic.
Yeah. I need an overview.
Just push that button. Tell them how long you did.
My late husband and I built our house up here in 1973. So it was still dark. That was the one thing I remember first coming up here into Mirrormont was that when you drive up here, it was really dark, except for where the few established houses were. So it was nice to see more lights coming on, to see more people coming into the community. And I'm still here, you know. I mean, it's that kind of community where you feel safe and you feel like there are people around you could call on if you needed help, there's support. And like Janie was saying, in the earlier days, the club was a big social resource for a lot of people. My son learned how to swim in the pool. But the progressive dinners were Christmas, they were at Christmas. And to me, one of the most fun things that Mirrormont did, basically, the dinners were cooked here. Do I understand that correctly? And people would volunteer. It was all volunteers. And there would be like 35 to 40 attendees, my number about right. And the first house would host the cocktail party, and everybody would gather there. And we'd all get to know each other and have drinks and appetizers. Then we'd be assigned a house. And so we'd be broken up into groups of like 10 people to each house, 10 couples to each house. And the host houses were delivered the dinners that all they had to do was heat the food up and serve it. So the people that hosted the dinners basically set the table and warmed up the food and served it, but they didn't actually have to do any of the cooking per se. That was all done here. So there was a lot of volunteer effort behind the Christmas parties. Everybody's houses were decorated for Christmas, so it was so much fun. Then at when we were all done with dinner, then we'd regather as one group at the dessert house. And we'd all have dessert and after dinner drinks, and this thing went on till all hours in the morning. And it was, yeah, as I said, it was probably one of the most fun times that we had up here that I can remember. So I would like to see the new generation of Mirrormont really get this club going again on a social level and promote these kinds of things, because it's a wonderful way to get to know your neighbors. And it was just a great time.
Glenda, haven't I seen you on horseback? Yes, I recognize you. Okay.
Yeah, Mirrormont is one of those wonderful communities where some of the lots will allow you to have horses on the lot either year-round or, you know, on a daily basis. And when we first moved up here, I rode a horse out of the Mirrormont stable that needed to be exercised, so I'd ride up around Mirrormont. And then I would see these two ladies ride their horses through Mirrormont, and I'd go running out, oh, I want a horse so bad, and I just, you know. Well, come to find out, they became very good friends of mine later because I joined Backcountry Horsemen, which is a large organization of backcountry trail riders. We do a lot of work on the trails, and in the high country we keep the trails open for stock and stuff like that. So those two women became very good friends of mine and riding friends of mine. And then years later I ended up getting a horse, and you know, and I'd bring him up here, and to ride around Mirrormont is just really fun. You kind of check out your neighbors. When you're that high, you know, you can really see into people's yards. But it's fun because the little kids come out, and Howard and I will put sleigh bells on the horses, and we'll jingle around Mirrormont at Christmas time, and carry candy canes, and every once in a while we'll run across somebody who's walking or hiking, and
they'll come running out. You know, we thought we heard sleigh bells, but you know. So that's the neat thing about this community is you can have you can have dogs and walk and just really enjoy. But we're not that far removed from civilization either, so it's really good. Okay.
No, it's a nice place to live or what?
I have a question. When I first moved up here, we had what was called the bridle trail, and we could all walk, and then that trail was damaged by someone doing some construction in their back of the yard, and we were never able to get it back open. But I heard two stories. One, that people rode their horses there, and the other was that that was an access for fire vehicles if they ever needed to get to some of those homes that were so steep at coming up Mirrormont front. Do you know what the story on that is?
I do not. Anyone else?
I know a scrap. This area was logged, and there were logging areas. There were logging roads, railroad, narrow gauge, that would come up here for the logs. In fact, there's one in back of my house across the road, and it really was part of the property of the lot. It wasn't the property, and so there was that dot.
Yeah. Well, we loved that. It's the, some of you know what I'm talking about, that bridle? We loved it because if you had dogs, you could let them off. But the house that you were mentioning, the gentleman, the big old house that was always got a tarp over it, that big old house. Yeah. John's house. Yeah, the house was behind that trail, and then whoever had bought that house originally from him, they tried to do some construction in the back, and they destroyed the bank. And then the county saw fit to close that because they thought we were kind of in an unsafe environment. And Mirrormont Club tried to get it reopened, but it's never been able to.
Speaking of that, I thought it was always pretty funny. You know where the Tree of Dreams is?
Yes, right, yeah.
Right there. You go down where the Wallsteads used to live, and they couldn't come today, but in their backyard, you're looking right down on these multi-million-dollar houses right in their backyard. And you know what the million-dollar house view is?
Cedar Grove.
The landfill. What do we got left? Questions? Anybody's stories?
Tom, I was always wondering if you might have mentioned this, but where does the name Mirrormont, where does that come from?
Yes, we do know that. Linda, our super researcher, found that out.
So I got the story from Rod Lovelace. He was in the army during the Second World War and stationed near Casablanca in North Africa. And he had a French girlfriend whose parents had a villa called Villa Mirrormont. And their villa was taken over by the officers for their residences, and they had officers' parties there. So he went there quite a bit with his girlfriend. And when they were looking for a name for Mirrormont, they were thinking of calling it Mirrormont, or
So you can see the sea, right?
yeah, he thought that and remembered this place, and he thought of then calling it Mirrormont, but that name had been used for other things. So he just so Mirrormont is view of the ocean. Mirrormont would be view of the mountain, and then he decided to call it Mirrormont as a reflection because Mirrormont had been used a lot before. And then they took off the E, and there you have Mirrormont.
Good question. Yeah.
I moved up here in 1986, and our realtor was from Redmond. And I did not know there was a legitimate front. I was coming up Tiger Mountain Road thinking, this is going to be, I got a school teacher's voice. I thought, this is going to be terrible. It was
for the recording.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
It'll be terrible with
Push the lever.
with the snow and ice. And someone said, well, why don't you use the front entrance? And I said, what front entrance? And we up here. There may be ex-pilots and it appealed to all the pilots because you didn't have to cross a bridge to get to the airport, you know, how quickly we can get to the airport. So we bought our house from a 747 captain who was Norwegian, Ragnar Kavisiak. And he lived happily up here until he married kind of a glitzy woman. And she felt that this town, this little rustic place was for the birds, so to speak. She couldn't wait to get out of here. So we were in the living room signing the papers for the house. And the room I use for my office, which I have one of the A-frames that's over there, and mine is kind of like a Lindelholm. It was built in 1974. We have a lot of new rock. If you've walked on 159th Place, we have a lot of new rock construction that we've done in the front. But anyway, she had a professional tanning bed in the room I use for my office. And we're sitting there, we're signing the papers, and she said, "Aren't you afraid to be up here by yourself? I hear things at night." And I said, "Barbara, you'd have to be Spider-Man to exist on my roof." When we were trying to re-roof our house, we'd get these phone calls from contractors. They'd be on their cell phones and they'd say, "I'm looking at your roof, and no, I'm not interested. It's a little steep." So she moved to the plateau, and then now I hear she's happily living in Scottsdale, Arizona. And poor Ragnar, who adored it up here, you know, and it reminded him of Norway. But I asked him how much my electric bill was going to be, because it's a total electric house. And he said, "I don't know, I go fly Hong Kong, Japan, I'm gone for 11 days, and I just don't pay any attention to what my utilities are." So anyway, that's my story of Mirrormont. I'm happy up here.
I guess I'm a newbie. I moved here in '87, and we came from very flat Florida, and we drove cross country, and 3,500 miles later, the prettiest part of the entire 7-day trip was from the top of Snoqualmie Summit down to Mirrormont. So we came in on 18, the back way. And we came, this is December maybe 4th-ish? No, I think it was December 7th. Anyway, we come up the back way, up Mirrormont, and then we turn onto 152nd. Remember, I come from Florida, and I saw the roller coaster. And at the bottom of the roller coaster was a woman and her daughter, who then became friends, sitting there watching people slide down. That was apparently the Mirrormont activity, the amusement of the day, was to sit at the bottom of this thing and watch people slide out on the roller coaster.
I did it backwards, but still.
Yeah, and we got here, and the moving company said, "Oh, we're not going to deliver up there. We'll see you in April." And finally they got somebody who said, "Oh, those California drivers," and they grabbed a truck, they came up, they put plywood down our driveway, they actually threw stuff down our driveway. They said, "Look, we're going to get it all into the garage and we'll worry about it later," because we arrived in between fronts. And that's how we came here.
There are a lot of stories about sliding. And she talked about that hill where the kids sleigh ride a lot, but I think the dangerous one is what we call the school bus curves, which is the back Tiger Mountain Road. When you go down, you hit that real sharp thing. There didn't used to be barriers there. And they call it that because almost every year the school bus would slide off the hill. Not down rolling or anything, but just, you know, sliding into the ditch. And very often, I wish was here because he could tell you all about the TV tower relay situation when we couldn't get TV here. Rode to work together, and we'd come home that way a couple times, and cars would come sliding backwards down that hill, you know, almost to hit you. So I want to give you a little piece of advice. If we do get one of those kind of winters again, and you can't get up the front hill, and lots of people used to park down there and walk, so then they try to go around and come that way, and you can't do that either. But if you go all the way down to the what I call the back Tiger Mountain entrance, you can almost always come up that way. So keep that in mind. Anybody else? But it's not going to snow anymore, right? We have global warming now. More questions?
Yeah. Where was the old broadcast tower?
I don't clear the land and I can't remember.
It was up on Tiger Mountain.
On Tiger Mountain, that's all I can remember.
That Tiger Mountain. Yeah, it was up on the main Tiger.
Yeah.
It's in one of the Mirrormont properties and has an easement.
What, really?
No, no.
Yeah.
I thought you had to go around the firehouse and way back up in there.
That's across that road. I was the secretary of that thing, I don't remember anything about it, the guys did all the work. But it was across Tiger Mountain and up the other
It
side.
was pretty far up
Back
there.
with Firehouse and up the
Yeah.
Firehouse.
Yeah, Barry would have a lot of stories. He's a really smart guy and lived up there almost as long as anybody. The only problem with Barry is I rode to work with him also, and he drove an old Volkswagen, and I'm sitting on the passenger seat, and he is busily talking to the window in a British accent. I couldn't understand a word he said. And he lectures on finance in Europe all the time, and I know people can't understand it.
They did in England. They did in England, in York.
I suppose in England they did, but they just left apparently. Somebody
They
here,
got a cabin up in Decatur Island.
no, somebody here just took them to the airport for another one of their international trips.
So
Yeah.
they're always.
Tom, I'd
Anybody
just
else?
like to express my appreciation and gratitude for all the people that put this together. Because it's just,
Well, as you know, Kelly Pacelli, who may be, is a real estate, oh, there she is, real estate agent here, was sort of the committee, de facto committee chairman and the driver, and she's a wonderful woman, but I wouldn't want her around me very much. Too many ideas a minute. Very, very clever. And then Mike Paulson, who may or may not be here,
Probably out now.
is the guy who did all the logistical work, getting the vans, the sanding cans, the signs, you know, arranging the field, all that sort of thing. Those three. Then Heidi Kaler, who's the daughter of somebody up here. Yeah. Oh, that's right. Well, Pauline and Phil, was it? Hanson used to live up here, and she was their daughter and got married and came back, just like your daughter did, got married and came back. Heidi was instrumental in the committee, as was Tyra, your daughter, the country club president. So that group of people really did all this work to put it on. I'm probably forgetting somebody. Well, in final, in the end, they found their savior. What's her name?
Darlene Weigler.
Yeah, Darlene Weigler, who turns out could do all kinds of graphics and cutting and fixing stuff, which they were all worried about until she showed up and really put it all together. So it was quite a committee.
one more story. I live across the street from Cindy Ebersole, and that's her house, one of the oldest.
Wait, you gotta get on recording.
Cindy's house is the one that has a bridge going across it. And her husband, where? Yeah.
Go on,
Yeah.
so you can't
If you get a chance to read that, it talks about the English family that was being, Boeing was trying to get him to come to work for Boeing. And the Seattle Times had made brochures about this area, and they were sending them out as a recruitment tool. And so this English couple got this from Boeing, and then the first thing they did was come to Mirrormont and buy the house that Cindy's in now.
Their name was Slade.
Slade, yeah, so that's a very interesting story. But Cindy tells me that when they bought the house she's been here 40 years. Yeah, that they had to get like the respirators and put them on because they had so much bat dung in their fireplace walls and such, because bats love A-frames, just because they get under the shingles. And I'd say we've had at least 5 bats in the house, and they're really hard to get rid of at night when it's cold and you got every window open because you're trying to get the bat out of the house. But behind Cindy's house are the old trails for the coal and for the lumber. There's actually
trails that you can follow where they did. Is it coal or is it trees that the trail in Cindy's house? You know, but you can see the, yeah, you can actually see the trails from that many years. So that's my last A-frame story.
And we have always familiarly called that house the house with the red door.
Okay.
All these years, because the door was painted red, and as far as I know, still is, but you can't see it anymore. Yeah. And speaking of the logging and all that, our kids, when they were growing up here, the Kenny and the Phelps, the rest of them out on the mountain, they found old engines and old machinery and all kinds of stuff, and we're pretty sure that's where some of our dogs ended up, down some little mine. They never came back.
Might have been a coyote.
Could have been a coyote. Yeah, and it was early on, the little boy, a 10-year-old boy went missing, and we had a massive search party all over the mountain trying to find him. And I think that's the one where they found out his father took him to the East Coast or something. I forgot that story. We have a lot of these stories. Anybody else? We want to go out and hear the music. Have a beer. Or some wine. Meeting adjourned.
Well, I was going to tell a story Since my children, who are now in their 40s, aren't here, I can tell you stories on them. One day, I was taking tennis lessons over here, and the fire trucks came by, and we said, I wonder what that is. Then the Austin kids showed up, and they stood quietly by the court. When the tennis lesson was over, I said, I wonder what's happening. And they said, oh, David's up in the tree. They had to get the fire truck to come out. My other one is my daughter, Jillian. Do any of you remember Enrique, that adorable guy who was our tennis instructor? He took a liking to Jillian. I was working at the time, so I wasn't aware of everything that was happening. But one day I took a day off, and I came over to the pool, and Jillian was here, and Enrique walked in, and there was silence. All of the mothers turned and looked at me, and I thought, what is this? And that's when I found out that Enrique had a crush on Jillian. And so I said to David, Enrique was 5 years older than Jillian. My son David was 5 years younger than my daughter. And I said, David, don't ever let them out of your sight. And so after that, my daughter said, how could you have done that, Mom? Every time we went for a walk, David was behind a tree. Anyway, that's all my tales.